Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. This is a question on Bahrain. Could you tell us what you did say to your Bahraini counterpart regarding the human rights situation in this country? The last human rights report from the Department of State in 2012 pointed out, I quote, egregious human rights problems in 2011 in Bahrain, including the inability of citizens to peacefully change their government. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. We had a very good, constructive conversation about all of the issues of the region as well as the internal issues of Bahrain. And I expressed the concern of all people for the protection of the rights of everybody. And we talked about the dialogue. The Foreign Minister made it clear to me that they remain committed to the dialogue, that they are engaged right now in advancing it. They're at some important stages within it. Progress is being made. And what I did was encourage him to continue that dialogue and to reach a resolution with respect to some of these difficult issues. He assured me that they are going to continue in good faith, and obviously all of us encourage that and look forward to some positive results.
Haytham Abu Saleh from Al Jazeera Arabic channel. Your Excellency, I have a question regarding the Syrian crisis. Is there full agreement with the American position vis-à-vis the Syrian question, or there are still differences, especially when it regards the question of arming the rebels in Syria? The question for Mr. Kerry is, first of all, yesterday you called for guarantees before providing any weapons to the moderate Syrian opposition. You didn't specify what kind of guarantees. Can you please elaborate? And also, Iran said that Assad should remain until 2014. This is a challenge to all the efforts of all parts to consider Assad as some president who lost legitimacy. Also, it's noticed that the United States is not doing much apart from saying much, maybe. You just said President Obama considers Assad as someone who lost legitimacy. Away from rhetoric, what kind of practical steps is the administration and President Obama likely to take, and in what timeline, please?
I'll begin by saying I'm not sure what guarantees you're referring to. I never asked for or suggested any particular guarantees. What I did say is there are greater guarantees now that the weapons are being transferred to moderate and to directly the Syrian opposition. There's never a full guarantee, and I think I also said that when I was speaking. In addition, what I said, and I have no right, I honestly have never suggested that Iran, that there's a date associated with Iran's support in 2014. So let me make it clear.
No, the Iranian, they said that.
Oh, then the translation, we lost something in the translation, and I apologize. Thank you very much. That's helpful. In that case, that may be the Iranian position, but I don't believe it is the position of the people of Syria. And I think ultimately the people of Syria will speak on this. The Syrian opposition clearly is promising a future for all of the people of Syria. Bashar Assad is not. And what the Syrian opposition has said is that all people will be protected. Alawi, Druze, Shia, Sunni, Christian, all of the different people will be part of choosing the future of their government. Bashar Assad has made it clear that he is unwilling to sit down and provide the negotiation that was called for in Geneva last year. Instead, he has responded with Scud missiles, with assassinations, with releasing his army, his air force, dropping bombs, in trying to subjugate people, much in the way that his father did years ago. So we are clear, and have been clear, there is a framework for a peaceful resolution. The Iranians can support it, the Russians can support it, and Bashar Assad can support it. And that formula is set out in the Geneva Communique, which provides for a transition government with full executive authority chosen by mutual consent. That means President Assad can choose who will represent him, and the Syrian opposition can choose who will represent them, and then the Syrian people will choose who will represent them as a country. Now, that is a reasonable way to end the violence, a reasonable way to allow the people of a country to determine their future. And that's what we are supporting. Now, the Iranians can support that, and so can the Russians. And I believe in my conversations with Sergei Lavrov that he does support that, and he's prepared to try to help make that happen. So this is really up to Bashar al-Assad and the Syrian opposition to determine if it will be a peaceful outcome, or whether or not the Syrian opposition will continue to put the pressure on to try to bring him to the negotiating table. And that's where we are.
Mr. Secretary, you mentioned at the Rome Conference on Syria, and again here today, that when people try to assess what's being done to help the Syrian opposition coalition, that it's important to look at the totality of the international effort, that different countries, different nations are helping in different ways. Has the United States reached an understanding with Saudi Arabia, with the UAE, and other states about what sort of weapons should be provided to the opposition, and whom specifically, which groups they should be provided to? Or do you have concerns that states like Qatar are providing weapons to groups that you're not entirely comfortable with? And lastly, on the way over here, we heard that North Korea is threatening to abrogate the armistice. I wonder if you have any thoughts on that. And to the Prime Minister, you mentioned that the international community seems to be more receptive to the question of arming the Syrian opposition. Have you had productive discussions with the Americans on who specifically in the opposition should be equipped with arms and what they should be equipped with? Thank you.
With respect to the arms and the transfer, we did discuss. We had a discussion about the types of weapons that are being transferred and by whom. We are aware of what people are doing. I don't think the United States is engaged in a specific allotment process or designated process, but obviously we are aware. And it is that awareness that informs the President's decision about what is needed and what the United States is prepared to do at this point in time. In addition, we did discuss the question of the ability to try to guarantee that it's going to the right people and to the moderate Syrian opposition coalition. And I think it's really in the last months that has developed as a capacity that we have greater confidence in. I think I said yesterday, you can't guarantee that one weapon or another may not fall in that kind of a situation into hands that you don't want it in. But in terms of the fundamental balance of battlefield tactics and of effort, I think it's pretty clear that the Prime Minister shares a belief in trying to do what we need to do rapidly and to try to effect this most effectively through the Syrian opposition coalition. And that's what we're trying to do. With respect to North Korea, let me say one other thing on the partly in answer to the question before too. The President's purpose here, and I think everybody's purpose, is to try to minimize the killing, is try to end the killing, end the violence. And it's the President's judgment for the moment that we would like to see whether or not President Assad shares that view and would like to, in fact, save his country and proceed through the Geneva Communique to a peaceful process. There are lots of options that remain if in days or weeks or whatever that opportunity is not taken advantage of. So I think when you look at the whole of those countries that are engaged, the numbers of nations that have come to the table to stand for the Syrian people, there is a very significant amount of support for the Syrian coalition at this point in time. With respect to North Korea, I think President Obama and the American people and the world would like to see the leader of North Korea, Kim Jong-un, take responsible actions for peace and for responsible activity within the region. And rather than threaten to abrogate and threaten to move in some new direction, the world would be better served if he would direct his people and make a decision himself to engage in a legitimate dialogue, in legitimate negotiations in order to resolve not just American concerns, but the concerns of the Japanese, of the South Koreans, of the Russians, the Chinese, and South Korea, I think I said South Koreans, everybody in the region. And so that's our hope, that we will continue to do what is necessary to defend our nation and the region together with our allies, but our preference is not to brandish threats at each other. It is to get to the table and negotiate a peaceful resolution to that crisis also.
I will speak in Arabic, so if you want to use
أتحدث بالعربية.
First of all, thanks God that
أولا الحمد لله أن
we
كوريا
cannot blame us also for that.
أن لكي لا يلقون باللوم علينا في هذا أيضا.
بالنسبة لموضوع الأسلحة هذه السمعة طبعا
Weapons, this kind of fame or reputation about Qatar came from the Libyan crisis when Gaddafi started killing people left, right and center, and the international community was rushing into providing weapons to the people who are resisting Gaddafi's regime. Qatar was amongst the first countries to support the rebels with some equipment, and at that time and in that chaos maybe some mistakes may have been committed. But let's look from a practical point of view this question. Even if there is any party which is providing weapons, and there are other parties which fell into the same problem, but they were not mentioned, only Qatar was mentioned because of a political difference and not a practical difference. The political difference between the brotherly countries of this area, who is helping who. They think we are supporting a certain party in Egypt, and of course everybody is right to choose who they support, and they have their right to, but who has more right to support is the peoples, whether with the Egyptian, Libyan or others. If the problem started here, maybe something happened, but not at the magnitude that was portrayed, especially to Western countries, because Western countries, once people talk about terrorism, they pay attention, and I don't blame them for that. Now, any Western government or the United States, if people want to attract your attention, they talk about terrorism. We tried that in the past with our friends in the West. As for Syria, I said in the beginning that if all worked with more diligence and seriousness, this regime would have gone by now, but everything which was provided by countries with the knowledge of other countries was provided through a certain regime, and everybody was keen that such help and support would go for self-defense and nothing more than self-defense or other than self-defense. But the longer the crisis goes on, other parties will get involved. We don't want that. We want the moderate parties to prevail, and we want our support to go to the moderate factions, and therefore it's very important that this issue is not used by the Syrian regime, because they know the West gets alarmed when they hear these stories, and maybe this was manipulated by some brotherly states in this region. And therefore, this thing was blown out of proportion and exaggerated. And I'm not an expert on arms, but if there is some rocket-propelled grenades like RPGs or anything provided, this will not threaten the world order. And of course, we are against that approach anyway, but it is dangerous somewhat when there is a regime which shoots down civilian aircraft, and the bombing of a nightclub in Germany, and what the Gaddafi's regime did to bring down the TWA aircraft or the French aircraft. You know how these regimes provided weapons to some extremist groups and factions. We want regimes to have a legal outlook. They respect their countries, they develop their countries, they fulfill the needs of their people, and not the kind of regimes to create chaos and destruction to gain their importance. We are a small country, we want stability and peace with our neighbors, but we cannot tolerate injustices committed in the manner that this inflicted upon the Syrian people. So therefore, to say that terrorism, any terrorist now is Bashar. Bashar is the terrorist. Who started all of this? He is killing his own people. Thank you very much. I thank you once again. I thank my friend, His Excellency, the Secretary of State. Thank you.